Right. Well, today I'm going to be talking about Mappa Mundi, which is not a Buddhist subject. It's a Christian map. And it's a map that's found in Hereford Cathedral. And as it says on the poster, it's a 13th century map. And it's very large, even though the poster here is quite small. But the map itself is, I think, 5 foot by 4 foot. Casper knows, he's seen the actual thing. I have to confess, I have not even been to see it. The way that I got interested in this was back in April, I got COVID. And if any of you have had COVID, and I'm guessing that quite a lot of you have from the statistics, I spent a lot of time feeling very low energy, very tired, not really up to doing anything very much, and getting a bit bored, lounging around, not having the energy to do anything much. So I started watching various documentaries that were on iPlayer and other sources. And I came across a BBC documentary, well, a series actually, a fascinating series. Unfortunately, they're not even up there anymore because I thought I'd watch it again before I came this week. But there was a series of programs about maps. And I found them absolutely fascinating because the basic premise behind the series was they were talking about the way that maps are not neutral, the way that maps actually serve a purpose in terms of communication. And the first one in this series was about Mappa Mundi, which is this map here on the poster. And as I was watching it, I was just sitting there, or lying there, thinking, but this is Buddhist psychology. This is fascinating. There were just so many parallels and so many things that just sparked my thinking off. So I then got an email from Buddhafield saying, would I do a talk? And I thought, well, there's the opportunity. I shall talk about Mappa Mundi. So I am not an expert. I've watched a few other documentaries since, but that's about my level of knowledge of the map. So I'm not going to talk as a historian or archivist or map enthusiast or anything of the kind. I'm going to talk as a Buddhist psychologist, but I'm going to talk about the things that struck me in hearing about this map. And it's very interesting. You know, and when I say that, you know, maps have messages, you know, I think this is so interesting because every map comes out of a context. Maps are created for reasons. You know, we take it for granted. But actually, the person who produces the map does it for a purpose, and they've usually got an agenda in producing the map. So what's the agenda behind this? Well, that's one of the things that I want to talk about today. But, you know, you can think about this in terms of any map. You know, you get a road atlas. What's the agenda behind a road atlas? Well, probably it's about getting people from A to B. You know, it might be produced by the AA or the RAC or whatever, and so it's got a purpose in that respect. But, you know, it may well have other things on it. And actually, if you go into your sort of Google Maps or whatever on your phone, what you'll find popping up is all sorts of, like, there's a McDonald's here and a, you know, whatever, Premier Inn there, or you get all the kind of advertising things start popping up, and you can see exactly where to buy your petrol, where to stay the night, where to get your food, your coffee, you know, whatever it is. They're all kind of popping up on the map because there's an agenda there. And, you know, the same's been true in the past, actually. You know, why did ordnance survey maps get created? Because they were doing surveys for ordnance purposes to do with the military and so on. So there's always an agenda with maps, and that agenda is reflected in the way that the map is presented. Okay, I'm going to pick up my notes so I don't go too far off-piste here. Okay, yes, the first thing that I wanted to talk about is, like, you know, when we look at this map, the first thing I certainly experienced when I looked at it was kind of like, it just looked very weird. And it certainly didn't seem to relate to anything that I recognised in terms of the world, the known world. And, you know, I knew that this was a map that was produced in medieval times that reflected in some way the medieval mind, but it didn't seem to me to be very accurate at all. And so, there was a bit of me going, well, this is obviously just a kind of lack of knowledge. These were people who didn't understand how things were. They were drawing in bits of sea and bits of land just rather randomly and marking places on them. But actually, the first thing that you realise when you hear a bit about this, and some of you may know this, is that although it's this way up, we might actually find it a bit more familiar if we turn it that way. I don't know if you can see this, but there's a mass of water going through here and up here, and there's a landmass here and a landmass here and a landmass here. And basically, this is the Mediterranean, this is Middle East and Asia, this is Europe, and this is Africa. Makes a lot more sense when you look at it that way. So you can see these three quadrants of Asia, Europe, and Africa marked in, and actually more or less where we would locate them. And when you start to look at all the kind of details on it, then you start to see that cities are placed reasonably close to where they are. I mean, there's distortions on it. Britain's marked in much bigger than it actually is because the map was created in Britain. And apparently Lincoln is bigger than anything else because they think it was actually made in Lincoln, and that Hereford was added in at a later date, though you can see lots of fingerprints where people were pointing to Hereford because that's where it ended up. But anyway, that's all just interesting beside the point. But this got me thinking in terms of Buddhist psychology, and I'll turn it back the right way now. Oops, wrong way. This got me thinking about the way that we orientate our thinking. Because we have such an assumption that when we look at a map that north is at the top. And actually, that's just an agreed kind of idea. It's a concept. It's something that we've collectively, over the years, evolved in terms of maps, that north goes at the top. Whereas in this map, what's going on? Well, they've got Jerusalem at the centre because Jerusalem was the centre of the Christian world. So what do you put at the centre of your map? You put Jerusalem there. And what's at the top of the map? This is your way to heaven, somehow going east. I'm not quite sure how that fits with the medieval mind. It sounds rather Buddhist to me, but anyway, I'll leave that with you. But, I think what's interesting is that shift of perspective, it's like until you look at this and you realise that it's turned through 90 degrees, we just assume that north at the top is how it is. And this is true of so much in life. There's so much that we just take it that this is how it is. And we don't even question it. We make assumptions. And there are some things that we're aware we're making assumptions on. Our sort of political views and so on. We know that we're a bit left of centre, or a bit right of centre, or a bit green, or whatever it is. And so we know we've got biases. But something like putting north at the top, we don't even realise that that's a bias until something happens that disrupts that disturbs us. And so that in itself feels to me to be a really valuable lesson for us. Because this is what Buddhism does. It says, don't believe your assumptions. Look again, look more closely at the world, because we're all caught in delusion. We're not seeing things as they are. We're making assumptions about them, and based on those assumptions, we're drawing up a personal world. Just like this map is a personal world for the people who created it. And that personal world has its orientation, it has its centre of gravity, it has its focal point, and so on. Just as a kind of aside, while I was thinking about this talk, I saw this on Facebook. I think it's absolutely fascinating. It's a bit of a small, it's a small print, I'm afraid, but you can come and have a look at it later. But what it is it's an artwork that's produced by a French cartographer and artist, somebody called Sabine Retore, and she called it Mediterranean Without Borders. And what she's done is she's taken the Mediterranean and she's turned it. And she's taken out all the borders of the countries. So that she's basically made the Mediterranean look a bit like a lake with lots of places all around the lake that you can visit and so on. So that this is the idea of it, is that suddenly it moves from being this divided land that's orientated north to something that's orientated in a different way and that looks completely different and becomes a whole rather than something that's partitioned. And again, I think there is a Buddhist message in that. So I'm going to, whoops, oh dear, have I disconnected myself? Sorry, okay. I'd forgotten I was, let me. Sorry about that. I shall try not to do that again. That's the one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm not very good with microphones. Okay, anyway, I shall pin it up there because I'm going to talk about it a bit later. But, you know, I think this is what's interesting, is that we are locked into our own perspectives. We put something in the focal point of our attention, and that builds the whole world around it. And for the makers of this map, that was Jerusalem. For the maker of this map, it was something about continuity, about togetherness, about the interconnection of peoples and the dissolution of borders. But what's at the centre of your map? I'd like to invite you just to take 5 minutes just to reflect, and you can, if you've got some paper, you can write. If you've got somebody next to you, you can just have a conversation with them, or you can just sit and meditate, whatever feels right to you. But I'd like you to just reflect. How do you orientate your map of the world? Just as a starting point, and then I'm going to go on and talk a little bit more about some of the Buddhist psychology behind this. Okay, so 5 minutes.
I imagine the world as like the roundness of it. But I think predominantly a world maybe with distinct proportions. You think Europe and
Okay, I think I shall move us on. Right, thank you very much. Okay, so we've looked at the basic orientation of the map towards the east rather than towards the north, and the way in which that plays out in terms of our idea of the mind being conditioned with a particular directionality, that we have particular things that we put as important, and those colour everything that goes on in our mind. The whole shape of our perception of the world is coloured by the things that we place at the centre of our life map. But also, when we start to look at what's represented on the Mappa Mundi, it's fascinating, because actually there are all sorts of different types of things represented there. And in the documentary that I was watching, they were talking about 3 different types of information that are found there, or 3 different levels of content in the map. And I think this again is fascinating in terms of the way that the mind is constructed, and I see a lot of parallels in this with Buddhist psychology. So the first level that they talked about was in a way, the level of reality, that the map contains a lot of factual data about the world as it was known in the 13th century. So you have rivers, you have seas, you have cities, you have different kinds of terrain marked, and these are all there on the surface of the map. And these are factual information, and in many ways it's a kind of encyclopedia. It's a reference point that people can go and look at, and I think particularly in a time when people weren't necessarily that literate, they could see the whole of human knowledge there presented on this one piece of work delineated out there. And also, alongside this, there are a lot of things that related to history, and particularly biblical history. So the Noah's Ark is on there, the flood. I think certainly the Garden of Eden is there, the crucifixion. A lot of the sort of historic things that were important to the Christian world are marked on that map. And so, in a way, you've got representations of the realities of time and space as they were known by the people of the time. And, again, it's interesting, because we kind of assume these to be reality, and we assume that we know what reality is. But you look at the reality that's here on this medieval map, and you look at the reality that we present in a modern textbook, and which is the most accurate? I mean, I'm getting old enough now that I can remember things presented as knowledge that was factual, that was definite, that was presented when I was young, that now is out the window. They've completely changed their ideas about things. I was just talking to somebody yesterday. When I had my children, we were told that if you laid a child on its back, it would vomit and it would choke itself. And so you always had to lay the child on its stomach. Now, young mothers are terrified by the idea of laying the child on its stomach because they might suffocate on the sheet. But both of those things were told as absolute facts of what you should do. Are they? I think they're opinion. But a lot of things are like that. Things that we thought we'd discovered in all sorts of fields, they come into question. And actually, although in the modern world we put a lot of score by science, and we assume that science has the answers and science has definite factual information to give us, actually science is a constant state of inquiry, and it's based on hypotheses, and actually even things that were established as facts for centuries come into question and are revised and changed, and there is a constant process of developing knowledge, so that even the certainties that we think we have everything is provisional, everything is in flux. And, you know, I think this is an interesting aspect of this map, is that it demonstrates to us that actually even the things that were certainties in those days are no longer certainties, and the certainties that are certainties to us, in 700 years' time, they'll probably be having a good laugh about. But, you know, maybe there'll be some things that are similar, some things that they can trace back. You know, we just don't know, but we cannot know for certain. Yeah, one more point I wanted to make about that. I think what you can see in this is that I talked about the way that the orientation that we have is biased, that we choose to put something at the top, we choose to put north at the top, we choose to put Jerusalem at the center, you know, whatever it is. These are biases that we have. But the biases are also there in these facts that we know. We think we know it because that's the frame that we come from. And something that lies behind that is not just our individual knowledge, but our collective knowledge. So we can see that this is not just about what I've found out over my lifetime, which is actually very little. It's also about what we collectively have found out and what we've agreed together, and the things that we've agreed to put forward as facts. And I'll say, well, this is true, and you'll say, yes, that's true, and you know, everything I'm telling you now, you know, you might or might not agree with me, and so on and so forth, but we build consensuses, and this is how humans operate. And these consensuses are at the individual level based on a whole series of processes of viewing the world in certain ways and continuing to reinforce that through our actions, through our perception and so on. And Buddhist psychology says a lot about this reinforcement that we go through. But it also happens on the collective level. We build collective consensuses. We build shared maps of the world. And based on those shared maps, we carve the world up in certain ways. And, you know, you can see this is the basis of cultures. And the culture of this country is different from the culture of the country over the water, which is different from the country on the other side of the world. I don't need to name places, but you get what I'm saying. There are cultural aspects to assumptions about facts and so on. But at the same time, you know, this, for the people who created it, there was a level of fact. Let's take it at that kind of basic level. And then there are a whole lot of things on this map which are about the mythic. Things which are fantasy, things which are particularly scary things. And if you look around the edge of it, then around the edge of this map, there are all sorts of strange and wonderful monsters. And, you know, this takes us into the world of mythology, story. Where does story come from? Story is something that comes out of this collective process. It's something that we co-create because we give meaning to ideas, we give meaning to images and so on, and we weave them together and we create all sorts of different ideas about the world that are, we know, not true in the scientific sense, but have a different kind of truth to them. So what's there? What are these demons and these monsters? Well, you know, it's interesting. When I look at these, my background is I'm a therapist. So I tend to look at them quite psychologically. So my story about them is that this is something about unconscious stuff that's pushed to the edges of the world. Is it? You've probably got your stories. They had their stories about it. But certainly there is something about the symbolic that tells us something about life that is deeply important. And, you know, these demons around the edges of life, what are they? What meaning do they have for us? You know, I think this is something that you can reflect for yourself on. What are the demons around the edge of life? And it's interesting because you know, I think again, with our kind of 21st century prejudice, we can sit here and we can think, oh, those medieval people, they believed in all sorts of wacky things and they just didn't know any better. But actually, it's quite interesting, because one of the other people that I listen to is Sarah Arrowsmith, who's the curator of these maps at Hereford Cathedral and the history there. She talked about one of the figures there, which are called blemmies, and they're these strange creatures that have their features of their face on their chest, and they have no head. And she said that apparently somebody asked, in one of the writings it was recorded, that somebody had asked whether these creatures actually existed, whether they were true or not. And the response that they got was, well, of course they exist. They're lawyers. And it's, you know, I thought that was just so funny, because it's like, there's me with all my prejudices thinking, well, this is a weird and wonderful medieval belief, but actually it's just the same sort of thing as we as modern people might have joked ourselves about people if we were being a bit unkind about lawyers, you know, that they had their mouths in their chests and that was where they spoke from, kind of, they spoke from their stomach and so on. So, you know, these things, they are metaphoric. They speak some truth. And is the truth that these speak any deeper than the truth that we know when we take our scientific inquiry? You know, I think this is the interesting question behind this. And in a way, this takes us on to the next level. And the next level is the level of the spiritual. Because this map is basically, its purpose, it's in a cathedral, it was produced by monks, and its purpose is basically a spiritual message. So this is really about the unfolding of God's purpose for the people who created the map. It's orientated around Jerusalem, which was the center of the spiritual world at the time, and it moves towards this place at the top, which is where the Jesus in glory is represented, and we see the whole symbolization of the Judgment Day. And this is the real purpose of the map, is to say something about the spiritual purpose of life, because life is not about the material, it's not about our fears and demons, it's about the spiritual journey. This, I think, is the message behind the map at its simplest. And this put me thinking about another image which I'm quite familiar with, and you're probably not, because I'm coming from a Pure Land Buddhist background. And this is not exactly a map, but it's an illustration of a story. Again, I'm afraid it's a small picture, but, and I won't go and hang it up there and disconnect my microphone this time. Actually, can I just talk about it a little bit first? But I'll tell you about what the story is. And this is a story about two rivers. So in a way, it's a kind of diagrammatic map. You've got a river on this side that's a river of fire. You've got a river on this side that's a river of water. And the line between the two is the line of what's called the White Path. It's a very narrow path that moves from one shore to the other shore. And this is really about the journey from the mundane world to the world of enlightenment, the Pure Land, however you want to phrase it. And it's really showing that there is a narrow path, which is, you could call the path of practice, though I don't, but you might call it the path of practice, which is going from this ordinary place, the world of samsara, where you are beset by all sorts of troubles, and there's robbers and so on there who are pursuing the man in the story, going from that world to the world of safety, the world of nirvana. And along the way, we're beset on the one side by the water, which is the waters of greed, which suck us in, the grasping nature of things. And on the other side, we have the fires of anger and so on. And we're treading that narrow path between the two. And this is what this illustration is of. And as I say, I think although it's not a map, in a way it is a kind of a map. And it shows us this bright path that we can follow. What struck me as particularly interesting about this, when I thought about this in relation to Mappa Mundi, is that Mappa Mundi, we have, at the beginning of the path, we have Jerusalem, which is the present-day place from which we are setting out on this spiritual journey to eternity. And in this place, above this, at the beginning of the path, the person who is on the path in the story, he is encouraged by Shakyamuni Buddha, by the historic Buddha, who is at the start of the path, who is saying, come on, this is how to do it. You keep going, and you'll get away from all these demons, and you can do it, mate, kind of thing. And at the other side is Amida Buddha, Amitabha Buddha, Amitayus Buddha, to put it in Sanskrit. But Amida Buddha is the Buddha of Pure Land Buddhism, who is the amalgamation of time and space, who is literally the measurelessness of Buddha, who is the Buddha of past, present, and future, all rolled into one, all Buddha-ness, all connectedness, all enlightenment, however you want to phrase it. And there are many, many different Buddhist terminologies you can use, but this is what's calling us, is this place of safety beyond the passions. And so this is another map, and I think in many ways echoes this map, where you have Jerusalem in this world, and you go up, and actually it goes through this area is the earthly paradise where Adam and Eve were, and it goes through all of that and arrives at the ultimate gate to heaven. So, again, I think this is an interesting parallel that we have. Oh, I need the other side of that, actually. Hang on, I'll take it out. There you go. Okay, and the point that I really want to make about this is that, we're presented here with these three different levels of material on the map. And it's very easy to, I think particularly as modern people, our bias is towards the material, towards that concrete level of the historic, of the geographic, of the facts of things. And we tend to trust those. And I think even in our Buddhist practice, we can get to that frame. And, I do it myself. I think, well, what can I rely on? I can rely on sitting solidly on the ground. I can rely on the breath. I can be aware of those things. But actually, and this is to use another Pure Land story, these are fingers pointing to the moon. Because, for me, the sitting on the ground feels solid, and I do a lot of that. And as a therapist, I work a lot with grounding, because coming into our bodies, feeling that connection to the earth, deeply important. But actually, it's symbolic. We're connecting to the earth. But, I'm actually connecting to a carpet that's probably actually made of something synthetic. I might be in my house connecting to a floorboard or a tiled floor or whatever it is. But symbolically, I'm connecting to the earth. So already the symbolic becomes more important. And what's that actually about? Again, fascinating, because yesterday I was at Devan's talk, and he was talking about joy, and he was talking about how practice of joy was something to do with relaxation. Well, to me, as a Pure Land Buddhist, I sat there and I thought, well, he's talking about Pure Land, for goodness sake. Because, what is it that we're connecting with when we feel the earth underneath us? We feel the solidness of the earth beneath us and the ground, and that material connection to the planet and so on, and as an ecotherapist, yes, that's important to me. But beyond that, what am I actually doing? I'm releasing myself from the confines of all my restrictive mental processes and my ego and my self-building and all those things that greed, hate and delusion that are on either side of that white path, and I'm just trust, just let go, take refuge, feel it. And that's the spiritual. So, you know, these three levels, the reality, the symbolic, the spiritual, they're a progression. They take us through. And actually each one, in a way, is a representation that takes us to the next and the next. And as we move through them, we go deeper. So, you know, I think in many ways what the Mappa Mundi is saying, and what my take on Buddhist teaching is saying, is that actually it's not the concrete and material. That's a starting point, and it's a very valuable starting point. And, you know, if you go to the Satipatthana, you start off with attention to the breath, to the body, you sit under the tree, and so on and so forth. But where does it take you? It takes you to that spiritual transformation, that experience that is beyond words, because even words themselves are a symbolization of something. They'll never give us the whole truth. The truth is something that is beyond our capacity to know. It's in the measureless. It's in the unknown. It's in the, just at the edge of our awareness. Okay, so we have a lot of stories here. We have stories about science. We have stories about mythology, culture, all those collective stories that we share. And we have the stories that are the fingers pointing to the moon of our deep spiritual nature. I'd like to just give you a few minutes again just to reflect. Again, you can do it on your own or you can talk to somebody. Just a few minutes to just reflect on what stories are you living by? How do these stories pan out in your life? How do the mundane stories relate to the spiritual stories? Okay, these are big topics, so you can take them away and think about them forever, but just for now, just a few minutes. Okay.
Because we can't see it over there. I don't think I needed to see
Yes, just a kind of general sense of it. Yeah, I'm talking very broadly about it, so it's... Okay, so again, if I can bring you back. You know, I think I'm just sowing some seeds at the moment, you know. This Buddha field's about seeds, so let's just sow some seeds and you can take them away and nurture them, grow them. Okay, so I want to talk about another aspect of the map. Because when you look at the map, there are, as you go around the map, there are 4 letters that are around the edge of the map. Here, 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 and here. And these letters spell out M-O-R-S, Moors. And Moors, in old medieval English French, because it was around soon after the Normans, so people spoke a kind of French in those days, was death. So, you know, what do we have here? We have the world that we inhabit, that we know, connected to, as the presenter of the program said very eloquently, I thought, fastened to the eternity through death. Death fastens our ordinary lives to eternity. And again, I thought this was a very powerful image in terms of Buddhist psychology, and it rang very true to me. Because, you know, if I had to fundamentally summarize Buddhist psychology in a few sentences, I would say that Buddhist psychology is all about our relationship to impermanence. And it's all about the way in which we try to escape impermanence and death by creating a form of permanence or an illusion of permanence. We grasp at things. You know, the image of the 2 rivers. We're constantly craving things or hating things, pushing things away. We grasp at objects, we reject objects. This is fundamental Buddhist psychology. And it's all about the way in which we are trying to somehow protect ourselves from the knowledge that nothing's actually very secure in life. So we build these sort of psychological and physical fortresses around ourselves by attachment to objects. And there's a whole process involved in that. But basically, we go around saying, I like that, I don't like that. And this is going on at a kind of completely unconscious level. And it's happening even at the level of what we notice. So, you know, if each of you looked out of that door at the things around us, you'd describe it in different ways. Different things would catch your attention. You know, you talk to your neighbour about what's great about Buddha Field, they're going to have a different view because they'll probably talk about things that you haven't even seen because they've got their story that's running. They've got their world story, and that world story consists of objects, and it attracts us to certain objects, and it leads us to build up patterns of seeing, patterns of behaviour, and this is all the way in which we create a feeling of security around us. We can create that illusion that actually we're immortal, and we're not. That's the basic news of Buddhism. You're not immortal. Tough. But the tough is mine, because Buddhism's actually saying that in recognizing this non-fixity of life, actually we release the joy of life. The joy is actually what comes to us when we stop trying to cling. We stop trying to hold on to things, we stop trying to push things away, we let go of those attachments and so on. That release, that feeling when we're sitting there and we just, okay, I can trust the ground underneath me. I can let go. I don't have to do it anymore. That's the feeling of liberation. And we can feel it in those little ways, in those little moments. But, you know, if we could feel it all the time, and goodness knows I certainly can't, then that would be something approaching the state of enlightenment. That feeling of just being with whatever arises, with the joy of embracing it and being embraced by it, because actually when we get to that stage there is no I to embrace. We just are part of the flow of it all. We're interconnected, we're deeply within it all. And that's the liberation that's there, and that's the liberation that we have in that final scene, that the transformation out of the ordinary life, that's the point of liberation, when we stop clinging on to the worldliness of this and we move out and something dies, you know. And I think this is what's interesting in the whole Buddhist thing. You know, what's the first noble truth? Dukkha, affliction. But sickness, old age, death, what were they? They were the things the Buddha encountered when he left the palace. He met those things. They sent him off on his path, on his journey. It's a letting go. It's a death of that ego that we've been clinging to. It's a moving into the unknown, moving into the measureless. And these ties that are here, represented by those 4 links, they're the ties that break the chains of that world that we've sewn ourselves into, and they liberate us, and they give us that freedom of moving from the measured into the measureless, from the little me into connection, into oneness with Amida Buddha, with the infinite. Again, with all those words that we use that try to push towards an understanding of the things that we cannot put into words. This is what it's about. Okay, so I'm going to move on again. You know, what's a map for? What's the purpose of the map? Why have a map? And again, I come back to where I was at the beginning. You know, the map always has a purpose, it always has an agenda. But at the end of the day, the map also is something that we use as a tool. And, you know, even if that Google map was there to persuade us to go to McDonald's, it's also very useful in terms of finding my way to Buddhafield. You know, we can use the map for the purpose that we want to use it for. That's the first thing. So the map is there as a tool. But, you know, maps are created with more and less benign agendas. And a map like this is created for a spiritual purpose. It's created in order to inform people and to give them a sense of their spiritual direction and what they need to do, and to inform their practice. And I was very struck, looking at this map, by the similarities to that map, the big one, the Tibetan Wheel of Life, which I'm sure will be familiar to most of you here. You know, what does that involve? It's the 6 realms, the realms of samsara, the realms of this world that we're embedded in, that we go round and round and round. We circle through, and we could talk about that in some detail. And round the edge we have the cycle of dependent origination, the way in which we create and recreate and maintain that sense of worldly self that goes round and round. And what's interesting is that the whole thing is held in the jaws of a monster, Yama. What we've got here is we've got people going back into hell. And the way that they go into hell is they go into the jaws of hell. So it struck me listening to it that there was an interesting parallel here between the jaws of hell and the jaws of Yama. You know, we are constantly being gobbled up by, I guess, by temptation, by all those pulls that we have, by our fears, by the things that are difficult. But actually, the interesting thing here is that the the fears are pushed to the edges. The fears are in the hells. They're mental states. But actually, if you read some of the other Buddhist texts, then these chaotic mental states are actually, they're closer to the possibility for enlightenment than some of the more tempting realms like the heavens and so on, where we can easily get caught up and enjoy ourselves and so on. But we're much more likely to achieve liberation by going into our really dark spaces and by embracing the shadow. So, you know, I think what we have here is a representation of the ways in which we can transcend that worldly self and connect to the eternal through these recognition of these difficult areas, these dark areas, the shadow areas, and ultimately that experience of death. And similarly here, we're held in this because of our fear of Yama, the Lord of Time. We're held because of our desire for fixity, for something solid, something that we can measure, something that is limited. And actually, we need to let go of all that. Actually, the real liberation is something beyond all of that, something when we let it go. And, you know, but these maps, they're maps for practice. And the last map that I have here is a mandala. I mean, again, something very familiar to you all, so it's only a small picture, but I'm sure you all know what a mandala looks like. It's a guide, it's a way to meditation. And you move through the mandala in different stages. I'm sure many of you know more about mandalas than I do, because it's not part of my practice. But as I understand it, you move through the different fields of the mandala, which symbolically are mapped onto all sorts of different realms, different times of day, seasons, all sorts of associations. Wonderful symbolism in it you can work with forever. But you go round it until you reach the summation of the whole thing, the whole. And this, in a way, is the last point that I want to make about the Mappa Mundi, because the Mappa Mundi is an embracing of the whole. There is no discrimination in the Mappa Mundi. It's all there. It's all part of the spiritual sphere. You have the demons, and you have the heavens, and you have the ordinary life, and you have the seas and the rivers and the towns, and you have God in his heaven, and Jerusalem, and the lot. It's all there. It's all part of the sphere. There is no separation. And I think if I wanted to take one thing from it at the end of the day, it's that inclusiveness. That our practice, you know, as the session this morning about polarities, I don't know if any of you were there, it's about bringing together all these different aspects and being open, not trying to select, not saying this is good and that's bad, because all of that is the process of falling into the river of water, the river of fire, the greed, the hate, the discrimination. It's about embracing and being open and allowing the other, the thing that is there, to be what it is, to be in its own right. And that, I think, is the basic message of Buddhist practice.